Assalamu alaikum. Ara Rohingya Zati. Ara Hokkan. Ara Dunyatun Sai.
The Rohingya are an ethnic Muslim minority group in Myanmar, predominantly residing in the Rakhine state, located in the western part of the country. They have a distinct language, culture, and history that differentiates them from the Buddhist majority population. In 1978, 200,000 Rohingya were forced to flee to Bangladesh as a result of Operation Dragon King, a military campaign involving a series of military offensives, forced relocations, and human rights abuses launched by the Myanmar, then Burma government against the Rohingya population living in the northern Rakhine state. The campaign followed years of tension between the Rohingya and the government. The Myanmar government has consistently denied the Rohingya recognition as one of the country's ethnic groups.
The government doesn't recognize Rohingya as an ethnic group. When it carried out a census in April, officials were told not to include those who identified themselves as Rohingya.
In 1982, Myanmar introduced a citizenship law, officially known as the Burma Citizenship Law, that effectively denied the Rohingya citizenship, rendering them stateless, despite their long history in the region. The law established 3 categories of citizenship. The full citizenship category was reserved for people whose ancestors settled in Myanmar before the British colonial era, which ended in 1948. Associate citizenship was designed for individuals whose ancestors did not qualify for full citizenship, but could prove residence in the country at the time of the independence in 1948. Naturalized citizenship was meant for those who had entered the country after independence, but could meet certain residency requirements. The Burma Citizenship Law made it nearly impossible for the Rohingya to qualify for citizenship, as they faced various obstacles and discrimination in the process. The law had effectively institutionalized discrimination. Over the years, the Rohingya have been subjected to violence, restrictions on movement, and denial of basic rights, including access to education and healthcare. They were largely restricted to their village tracts. In order to visit neighboring villages, they must obtain a travel pass which they must pay for. Travel is tightly controlled within North Arakan, and even access to Sittwe, the state capital, is prohibited for them. This restricted mobility has severe consequences, hampering their ability to reach markets, employment opportunities, healthcare facilities, and higher education. Myanmar's Operation Clean and Beautiful Nation in 1991 was yet another military campaign that forced 250,000 Rohingya to flee to neighboring Bangladesh. Soldiers executed, raped, assaulted the Rohingya, and destroyed their homes. Around this time, the Nasaka, a paramilitary force, was established to essentially persecute the Rohingya. It operated along the border areas and was responsible for maintaining security, enforcing immigration and border control, and conducting intelligence operations.
The ensuing government crackdown has sent tens of thousands of Rohingya fleeing, crossing the river to reach Bangladesh.
In 1994, Myanmar authorities stopped issuing Rohingya children with birth certificates. In 1998, in a letter to UNHCR, Burma's then Prime Minister General Khin Nyunt wrote, "These people are not originally from Myanmar, but have illegally migrated to Myanmar. They are racially, ethnically, culturally different from the other national races in our country." The pervasive poverty in Rakhine State at a staggering rate of 78%, coupled with inadequate infrastructure and scarce employment prospects, has intensified the divide between Buddhists and Muslim Rohingya. "We, Rohingyas, are like birds in a cage," says a Rohingya villager from North Arakan. However, caged birds are fed, while we have to struggle alone to feed ourselves. During the late 1990s, a local order was introduced in North Arakan, applying exclusively to the Muslim community. It stated that couples intending to marry were required to obtain official approval from local authorities, typically the Nasaka. In 2005, marriage authorizations were completely suspended. Upon resumption later that year, additional requirements were introduced, including a mandate for couples to sign an agreement not to have more than 2 children. The monetary bribes and time required to obtain a marriage permit have continued to rise each year since then. Religious disparities have further fueled this tension, occasionally erupting into conflicts. The Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, ARSA, a Rohingya armed group previously known as the Faith Movement, first emerged in October 2016 when it attacked 3 police outposts in the Mongdao and Rathadang townships, killing 9 police officers. The group's leader, Abu Ammar Jununi, blamed the Myanmar army for inciting the attack. For over 75 years, there have been various crimes and atrocities committed against the Rohingya. That's why we carried out the October 9, 2016 attack to send a message that if the violence is not stopped, we have the right to defend ourselves, he said. Furthermore, he has said that their legitimate self-defense is a necessary struggle, justified by the needs of human survival.
Therefore, now we have to deal with the government directly. We will continue to attack the oppressor, the government, until our citizenship is reinstated.
The Myanmar authorities, however, paint the group as Muslim terrorists who aim to impose Islamic rule. But Aziz Khan, a Rohingya living in Maungdaw Township, has claimed that the military and civilian government were scaremongering, and there was no evidence to suggest the group had any ties to any prescribed terrorist groups. The crisis escalated dramatically in August 2017, when the Myanmar military launched a brutal crackdown in response to attacks by Rohingya militants on security forces. At least 6,700 Rohingya were killed in the first months.
On the way, we saw many dead people, their heads and limbs chopped off. The slaughter took place house by house.
The military's operations were widely condemned for their merciless and excessive use of force, widespread killings, rape, arson, and forced displacement.
The
United Nations reported that since August of 2017, about 40,000 Rohingya have been forced to flee their homes in Myanmar's Rakhine state. The UN and various human rights organizations described the military's actions as ethnic cleansing and genocide. Civilians targeted, families ripped apart, senseless murder. The violence forced many Rohingya to flee to Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, and thousands more across the border into Bangladesh, joining an already significant Rohingya refugee population.
You can see they're carrying with them whatever they could salvage from their villages, their homes, that they say they were burnt out of by the Myanmar military. Look at that little baby there in a basket.
At the height of the crisis, one Bangladesh Border Patrol member said that 10 to 15,000 people were crossing into Bangladesh per day.
They had to cross this river, but there were too many persons in one boat, so thereby capsizing of the boats. We have to recover lots of dead bodies.
Myanmar soldiers planted landmines near border crossing sites used by Rohingya to flee to Bangladesh, trapping and starving thousands.
Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round. She is so thin. Are we going to try and get her onto a boat?
The river crossing is perilous and forced to take place in the dead of night.
Whatever the boat's condition, they're going to make these journeys.
Myanmar's former state councillor, Aung San Suu Kyi, has addressed the crisis, explaining that strife between communities in Rakhine state dates back to the 19th century.
Periodically, trouble has broken out there between the Muslim community and the Rakhine community. And we have inherited this very complex problem, and we have to deal with it, and we have to resolve it. So obviously it's not something that we can do overnight, and it's not something that we can find simple answers to.
Women and girls as young as 14 are also snatched by Burmese soldiers and sexually assaulted. Rape was used systematically to terrorize and humiliate women.
They want the world to actually take some action against the Burmese military that have committed these horrific gang rapes.
Prior to the 2017 crisis, there had been several waves of violence against the Rohingya. In 2012, deadly clashes between Rohingya Muslims and Buddhists in Rakhine state led to significant displacement and destruction.
Observers say local police are taking sides, helping the majority Buddhists, and even shooting at people trying to save their homes from the fire.
The immediate cause of the 2012 violence was the rape and murder of a Buddhist Rakhine woman. In retaliation, a mob of Buddhists attacked and killed 10 Muslim Rohingya men on June 3, 2012. Rohingya were forced into internally displaced persons camps, where living conditions were dire. The massive influx of Rohingya refugees into Bangladesh created immense challenges for humanitarian organizations and the Bangladeshi government. According to the UN Refugee Agency, there are over 9,000 Rohingya refugees in the country, including nearly 4,000 children who lack access to education. Many who have fled are living at the Kutupalong extension site in Cox's Bazar, now the world's largest refugee site. Risk of disease is high. Basic amenities were stretched thin. and more than 60% of the available water supply in refugee camps is contaminated.
After a surge in COVID-19 infections in Bangladesh, aid workers are warning of a humanitarian disaster if an outbreak occurs in Cox's Bazar.
Efforts to provide aid, healthcare, and education to the refugees faced numerous obstacles.
There are so many challenges we are facing in the camp right now, like there is lack of education, there is lack of livelihood, there is now opportunities and facilities for the refugees to survive here.
One toilet is shared by many families in the camp. Some women explain that toilets are places where sexual harassment, assaults, abduction, and even rape are commonplace. Women are especially vulnerable to this after 5 p.m. when aid workers are no longer allowed in the camp.
That's why it's so difficult for us women in the camps, and many of us are sad and depressed.
Dinah Perez, an Australian woman, has co-founded a learning center for teenage girls in the camp where men and boys are not allowed. Her mission is to provide a safe learning space for young girls whose families are unwilling to send them to school due to safety concerns and cultural norms. Dana says that adolescent girls start dropping out of school around ages 10 to 12.
Everyone knows why, because they started menstruating and now they've been kept at home. So we're trying to catch these disappearing girls.
Young girls are also forced into marriage, often because their families can't afford to feed them.
If I don't get married now, I'll be too old. They will call me a useless, bad woman, and the community will think I'm sleeping with other men.
On August 25, 2017, ARSA launched coordinated attacks on approximately 30 security force outposts in northern Rakhine State, Myanmar. The attacks led to a swift and disproportionately intense military response by the Myanmar security forces. ARSA claimed responsibility for the attacks, stating that they were in response to the long-standing persecution and discrimination faced by the Rohingya community in Myanmar. The group aimed to draw attention to the dire situation of the Rohingya and called for international intervention. In the aftermath of the attacks, the Myanmar military, known as the Tatmadaw, conducted what it described as clearance operations in the affected areas. However, numerous reports and eyewitness accounts indicated widespread human rights abuses, including extrajudicial killings, mass rapes, torture, starvation tactics, and the burning of Rohingya villages. The military's actions resulted in yet another massive exodus of Rohingya civilians, fleeing to Bangladesh to escape violence and persecution. Hundreds of thousands of people, including women, children, and the elderly, embarked on perilous journeys to seek safety in refugee camps. Over the years, the Rohingya crisis has garnered international attention and condemnation. Countries and humanitarian organizations provided aid and support to the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, including the United States, the EU, and the UK. The United States has imposed sanctions on individuals and entities involved in human rights abuses and atrocities against the Rohingya in Myanmar. The country has also provided significant financial support to humanitarian organizations and international agencies working in Bangladesh to assist Rohingya refugees. In addition to immediate humanitarian assistance, the EU has supported longer-term development programs aimed at enhancing the resilience of both Rohingya refugees and host communities in Bangladesh. These initiatives focus on areas such as livelihoods, education, and infrastructure development. The EU has been involved in emergency response and preparedness activities, working to address the immediate needs of Rohingya refugees. Since 2017, the UK has provided $365 million to support the Rohingya and Bangladeshi host communities in the form of food, shelter, water, sanitation, healthcare, and protection services. The UK government has also engaged diplomatically to raise awareness of the Rohingya crisis and advocate for a resolution. Finally, the UK has participated in efforts to resettle Rohingya refugees. Resettlement programs aim to provide refugees with opportunities for a new life in the UK, with access to support services and integration programs.
More than 300 Rohingya, most of whom arrived 9 years ago, live in Bradford in the north of England, making it the largest community in Europe.
However, efforts to repatriate the Rohingya to Myanmar have failed on 2 attempts.
They have no real intention to take us. It's all a show. We're appealing to the international community for justice. If justice prevails, only then will we go back.
Talks to attempt another have been suspended since the Myanmar military staged a coup in 2021. The coup occurred just hours before the newly elected Democratic Parliament was set to convene its first session following the November 2020 general elections. Most recently, in 2023, the UN Secretary-General expressed his concern for the expanding conflict in Myanmar, reaffirming that civilians should be protected in accordance with international humanitarian law, and those who violate it must be held accountable.
I call on the Myanmar authorities to suspend military action, end the violence, uphold the rule of law, and recognize the right of return of all those who had to leave the country.
The number of displaced people in Myanmar now exceeds 2 million. The UN Secretary-General called on Myanmar forces to end military operations, allow unfettered access for humanitarian support, and to ensure the safe, voluntary, dignified, and sustainable return of the refugees to their areas of origin. August 25th is Rohingya Genocide Remembrance Day. This day is significant in remembering the atrocities committed against the Rohingya people and raising awareness about the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Various human rights organizations, activists, and supporters around the world use this day to advocate for justice, accountability, and international intervention to address the Rohingya crisis. Thanks for watching this episode of History 101. Be sure to subscribe to see more videos like this.